A photograph freezes a moment, and when that moment turns out to be one of the last, the image takes on a weight it was never supposed to carry. From John Lennon signing an autograph for his own killer, to Freddie Mercury managing a smile in his garden 3 months before the end. These are the final frames of 13 rock legends, and the stories behind each one. Let's go through them, starting with a photo that has become one of the most chilling images in music history. On December 8, 1980, a man named Mark David Chapman stood outside the Dakota Building in New York City, holding a copy of John Lennon's latest album, Double Fantasy. The photos were captured outside of Lennon's New York residence, the Dakota, at 4 p.m. that day. Behind the lens was Paul Goresh, a New Jersey college student, who would frequently travel to New York to catch a glimpse of Lennon. Chapman waited outside Lennon's apartment and asked for an autograph. Lennon obliged and posed for a photo while signing a copy of Double Fantasy. After signing the album for him, Lennon asked, "Is this all you want?" Chapman smiled and nodded in agreement. That exchange, polite, casual human, is preserved forever in a photograph that would go on to be called one of the most iconic images in music history. Lennon, bespectacled and focused, leans over the LP cover with a pen, while the face of his murderer hovers in the background, partially obscured watching. The banality of the scene is what makes it so unsettling. A rock legend performing a routine act of kindness for a stranger who had already decided to kill him. Goresh would photograph the Beatle as he greeted Chapman and several others, before rushing into an awaiting limousine. After attending a recording session for the follow-up to Double Fantasy, Lennon would return home. After exiting a car at 10 p.m., Lennon and wife Yoko Ono were confronted by the mentally unstable Chapman, who opened fire on Lennon with a .38 handgun. Lennon was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he was declared dead an hour later. There is, however, another contender for the title of Last Photo. The famous photograph of Yoko Ono and John Lennon, taken on December 8, 1980, by Annie Leibovitz, has become one of the most iconic images in the history of contemporary photography. This image gained symbolic and historical significance not only for its artistic beauty, but also for the tragic event that followed. Annie Leibovitz, known for her celebrity portraits, was commissioned to create a photo shoot for the cover of Rolling Stone. The initial plan was to photograph John Lennon alone, but the singer insisted that his wife, Yoko Ono, be included in the shot. Leibovitz conceived an image that portrayed the vulnerability and intimacy of the couple. The photograph shows Lennon completely nude, wrapped around Yoko Ono, who is fully clothed. Leibovitz's photo of a naked Lennon embracing his wife, taken on the day of the murder, was the cover of the January 22nd, 1981 issue of Rolling Stone. In 2005, the American Society of Magazine Editors ranked it as the top magazine cover of the last 40 years. The juxtaposition is staggering. In one photo, Lennon is vulnerable, curled into the woman he loved. In the other, he is unknowingly signing a death warrant disguised as a record sleeve. He was so bright and witty, and he was so personable. Goresh recalled of Lennon, "When I was with him, I was in awe of him, but he made me feel so at ease, and he treated me as if I was his equal. And I was always impressed with that, because this guy would honestly rather talk about you than himself, and it was sincere." Lennon's death would shock the world, with many viewing it not only as a personal tragedy, but the end of the 1960s idealism and the final chapter in the Beatles story. The last photograph of Freddie Mercury was not taken on a stage, or at a press conference, or under studio lights. The last ever known photo of Freddie Mercury, taken in private just months before he died, has been identified. Taken by his long-term partner Jim Hutton on August 28, 1991. The photo shows Freddie standing in the garden of his beloved home, Garden Lodge, in West London. Posing with one of his cats, the star is seen standing in front of the Georgian house, framed by leaves and smiling at the camera. By that point, Freddie Mercury was battling the final stages of AIDS. His frame had withered, his cheeks were hollow, and he knew the end was closing in. But there he stood in his garden, managing a smile. Jim Hutton recalled that summer Freddie posed for a camera for the very last time, mine. It happened like this. I was out in the garden photographing some of the flowers in full bloom, and Freddie walked towards me. I trained the lens on. He wanted to move back a bit so it wasn't a close-up. Then he posed while I took 4 pictures, and he managed a smile for each. Hutton added, he was so pale and drawn that he knew he didn't look his best, but it didn't matter a bit. Of all the pictures I have of Freddie, those are the ones I love most. The intimacy of the image is what sets it apart from every flamboyant concert shot and magazine cover Freddie Mercury ever posed for. This was no performance. This was a man alone with the person he loved, choosing to smile even when his body was failing him. The late Queen frontman kept his AIDS diagnosis a secret to safeguard everyone close to his heart. Mercury decided to reveal his struggles to the public a day before his untimely death on November 24, 1991. Although he was suffering and dealing with his deteriorating health, Mercury remained positive and showed his determination to face what the future held for him with a smile. Mercury died on November 24, 1991, from bronchial pneumonia related to AIDS. Just a day after publicly confirming his diagnosis, he was 45 years old. Freddie Mercury's final live concert with Queen was a rock and roll spectacle, witnessed by over 120,000 fans at Kenilworth Park on August 9, 1986. This marked the peak of Queen's massive Magic Tour, and no one knew at the time that it would be Freddie's final bow on a concert stage. Between Knebworth and that garden photograph, 5 years passed. Years in which one of the most electrifying frontmen in rock history slowly disappeared from public view, retreating behind the walls of Garden Lodge as the disease consumed him. He and Hutton, who were not married but wore rings as a symbol of their commitment, lived monogamously until Mercury's death. Hutton was at his side when the end came. The final photograph of Freddie Mercury is, in many ways, a love story, told in a single fleeting frame. The last photo of Elvis Presley was taken at the Graceland Gates in the early hours of August 16, 1977, as he returned home from a late-night dentist appointment. He was still wearing his stage-style tracksuit, looking bloated but alert. Later that day, he collapsed in his bathroom and was pronounced dead from a heart attack at just 42 years old. The photograph itself is grainy. A fan snapped it from outside the gates as the king of rock and roll drove through in his car, the headlights cutting through the darkness. It wasn't posed, it wasn't planned. It was just a fan hoping for a glimpse and getting the last one anyone would ever have. Later that day, Presley had a heart attack and died in his bathroom, having had complications due to a drug habit and a weak heart. He had suffered from a range of health issues brought on by his notoriously hedonistic lifestyle, including drugs and an indulgent diet. Elvis had been deteriorating in plain sight for years. The lean, dangerous young man who shook his hips on The Ed Sullivan Show had long since been replaced by a bloated, medicated figure, stumbling through performances in Las Vegas jumpsuits. His entourage, the so-called Memphis Mafia, protected him from the truth, enabled his worst habits, and shielded him from the outside world. By the summer of 1977, Elvis Presley was a 42-year-old man with the body of someone decades older. Polypharmacy, fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and a schedule that swung between isolation and grueling concert tours had taken everything from him except his name. That blurry shot at the Graceland Gate is the final glimpse of a man who had been the most famous human being on the planet, reduced to a silhouette behind a car windshield in the Tennessee night. The last photo of Jimi Hendrix with his favorite guitar, Black Betty, was taken on September 17, 1970, by his girlfriend Monica Dannemann in the garden behind her apartment. This photograph was taken just one day before the legendary musician died in London on September 18, 1970. In the photo, Hendrix sits in the garden, guitar across his lap, looking relaxed but distant. It is the image of a man at rest, a rare thing for someone whose life had been a relentless whirlwind of touring, recording, and chemical excess. Hendrix was 27 years old and already considered the greatest electric guitarist in history. He had bent the instrument to his will, rewired the language of rock music, and performed at Woodstock and Monterey in shows that would become the stuff of mythology. Officially, he accidentally asphyxiated on his own vomit after taking too many sleeping pills, but more ominous rumors about his cause of death persist to this day. His girlfriend, Monica Dannemann, found him the following morning. The coroner's report stated that he had consumed a significant quantity of barbiturates, 9 sleeping pills belonging to Dannemann, along with red wine. The pills overwhelmed his system, and he choked in his sleep. There is no indication to suggest that Hendrix's death was a suicide, despite media speculation that it was. Instead, it was an accident, a cruel, mundane ending for a man whose life was anything but ordinary. That final photograph of Hendrix in the garden, calm and holding the instrument that made him immortal, is a snapshot of the last peaceful afternoon of a life that burned white-hot and burned out far too soon. The last formal photo of Kurt Cobain is from a Nirvana photo shoot, about 5 months before he died. It was the last formal photo shoot Nirvana ever did before the songwriter took his own life at the age of 27. The session was shot by photographer Jesse Froman. Cobain appeared visibly fragile, gaunt, sunken-eyed, swallowed up in layers of clothing. His expression shifted between blank detachment and a kind of pained defiance. He posed with his bandmates Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl, but even in the group shots, there was a separateness about him. He looked like a man already halfway out the door. Cobain was found with a high concentration of heroin and traces of diazepam in his body, and had a troubled history of addiction and depression. He died on April 5, 1994, having shot himself at his home in Seattle. Cobain's body was discovered on April 8th by an electrician who had come to install a security system. He had been dead for approximately 3 days. A suicide note was found nearby, addressed in part to his childhood imaginary friend, Boda. In it, Cobain wrote of his exhaustion, his inability to feel passion for music anymore, and his belief that his daughter Courtney would be better off without him. The Frohman photos, taken months before all of that, carry the weight of hindsight. They are the last time Kurt Cobain sat still long enough for someone to point a camera at him in a professional setting. Looking at those images now, knowing what came next, is like watching someone walk toward the edge of a cliff in slow motion and being powerless to call out. Taken just a month before his death on January 10, 2016, one of the last known photos of English rock star David Bowie was captured at the opening of his stage show, Lazarus, in New York City in December 2015. Bowie stood on the red carpet, thin and sharp-featured, dressed in a dark suit. He smiled for the cameras, and most of those present reported that he seemed in good spirits. But there was something gaunt about his face, something hollow behind the eyes. While other photos released around the same time show him looking rather healthy, this photograph shows the effect of liver cancer on his body. Despite his fame, he was known for keeping a relatively low profile in his later life, especially after he retreated from the public eye following a heart attack in 2004. His return with the album the next day in 2013 had shocked the world. Nobody knew he had even been recording. And then came Black Star, released on January 8, 2016, Bowie's 69th birthday. 2 days later, he was dead. What made Bowie's death especially poignant was how carefully orchestrated it had all seemed. It felt almost as if he had planned his final artistic statement. With the same level of care and detail he had applied to every persona and reinvention throughout his career. In the most Bowie way imaginable, his death was a final transformation and last performance. The title track of Black Star included imagery of death and transcendence. The music video for Lazarus literally opened with Bowie lying in a hospital bed, bandaged, eyes covered, writing feverishly. The name Lazarus, the biblical figure raised from the dead, was his farewell message wrapped in metaphor. Even death, for David Bowie, was a creative act. That last photograph at the Lazarus premiere is him taking his final bow, dressed immaculately, playing the role of David Bowie one last time before the curtain dropped. Jim Morrison, Paris, 5 days. The Doors frontman Jim Morrison was photographed posing with his longtime girlfriend Pamela Courson, just 5 days before Morrison's death in Paris on July 3, 1971. He was only 27 when he died, and the exact cause remains shrouded in mystery to this day. Morrison had fled to Paris earlier that year, exhausted and bloated from years of alcohol abuse, disillusioned with the rock star machine he had helped create. He had told people he wanted to be a poet, not a performer. He wanted to write, to walk the streets of the city that had inspired so many artists before him, and to disappear from the spotlight that had nearly consumed him alive. In the photograph, taken on a street in Paris, Morrison is bearded and heavy-set, barely recognizable from the Adonis figure, who had writhed across stages in leather trousers just a few years earlier. Pamela Courson stands beside him, small and thin. They look like any other couple on holiday. 5 days later, Morrison was found dead in his bathtub. No autopsy was ever performed. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but conspiracy theories have shadowed the event ever since. Theories involving heroin, a nightclub overdose, and a desperate cover-up by those closest to him. What is certain is that Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the poet of the Sunset Strip, died alone in a bathtub in a Paris apartment at 27, leaving behind a body of work that would only grow more mythic with every passing decade. Amy Winehouse, walking in Camden. Amy Winehouse was seen walking in London shortly before her death on July 23, 2011. It was soon determined that Winehouse died from alcohol poisoning. After the 27-year-old singer resumed drinking following a period of attempted sobriety. The last photos of Amy Winehouse show her doing what she so often did, moving through the streets of Camden, the neighborhood she called home, in her own world. Her beehive was in place, her eyeliner thick, her frame thin. She looked fragile but alive. She was 27. Her death came after a period in which her life had become a public spectacle. The paparazzi trailed her everywhere, capturing every stumble, every mascara-streaked breakdown, every barefoot walk through North London. Tabloids ran unflattering photographs with gleeful cruelty. The woman who had written Back to Black, one of the greatest soul albums of the 21st century, had been reduced to a punchline. In the final days before her death, Winehouse had been trying to get sober. She had stopped drinking for several weeks. But on the night of July 22, she began drinking again. The quantity of alcohol in her system was more than 5 times the legal drink-drive limit. Her body, weakened by years of abuse, simply could not take it. The photo of her walking through Camden, shoulders slightly hunched, alone, heading nowhere in particular, is the last we see of Amy Winehouse on this earth. She joins Hendrix, Morrison, Cobain, and Janis Joplin in the so-called 27 Club, a grim fraternity of musicians who all died at the same age. Ian Curtis, father and daughter. Ian Curtis, singer for 70s rock band Joy Division, was photographed posing with his infant daughter just 5 days before he took his own life in 1980. In the photo, Curtis holds his baby daughter Natalie in his arms. He is looking at the camera with an expression that is hard to read, part tenderness, part detachment, part exhaustion. It is a domestic image, private and unassuming, and it carries no hint of what was about to happen. Just days later, struggling with epilepsy and a failing marriage, the 23-year-old hanged himself in his kitchen on May 18, 1980. Curtis had been battling epilepsy, which caused him to suffer seizures, sometimes on stage, in full view of audiences who often could not tell the difference between a medical episode and one of his famously trance-like dance movements. His marriage to Deborah Curtis was disintegrating. He had begun an affair with a Belgian woman named Annick Honoré, and the guilt of it was tearing him apart. His band, Joy Division, was on the verge of a breakthrough. Their album Closer was nearly finished, and a first American tour was weeks away. On the night of May 17th, Curtis watched Werner Herzog's film Strášek alone in his house. He then listened to Iggy Pop's The Idiot. Sometime in the early hours of May 18, he hanged himself in his kitchen. He was 23 years old. Joy Division became New Order. Closer became a masterpiece. And that photograph of Ian Curtis holding his infant daughter became one of the most heart-wrenching images in the history of rock music. A young father on the edge with a child who would grow up without him. Chester Bennington. The family photo. Chester Bennington appeared smiling in a photo shared by his wife on July 19, 2017, just 1 day before his death. The image shows him with family, giving no indication of distress. On July 20th, he died by suicide at his home in California. The photograph is the kind that exists on millions of phones. A family snapshot, casual, unremarkable. Chester Bennington is smiling. His family surrounds him. There's nothing in the image that suggests anything is wrong, and that is precisely what makes it so devastating. Bennington had always been open about his struggles with addiction and depression, but those close to him were shocked by his suicide. The day after Cornell's memorial, Bennington tweeted that he was feeling very creative and had written 6 new songs. Around the same time, he told a friend, Renee Mata, "We have to stick together and we have so much to live for." Bennington was just 41 years old at the time of his death. Talinda Bennington posted footage of her husband Chester laughing, just 36 hours before he took his own life in 2017. That video, which surfaced shortly after his death, showed him playful and engaged, horsing around with his family. People struggled to reconcile the laughter in the video with the tragedy that followed. But those who understand depression know that the two are not mutually exclusive, that the darkest moments often come not during the lows, but in the strange, quiet spaces between them. Bennington had survived a childhood marked by abuse, had fought addiction throughout his adult life, and had channeled all of it into Linkin Park's music. Music that gave voice to a generation of people struggling with their own pain. His death, on what would have been his close friend Chris Cornell's 53rd birthday, left a wound that has never fully healed in the rock community. Bob Marley, The Journey Home. The last image of Bob Marley was taken as he was heading back to his native Jamaica, but he never made it home. The reggae icon succumbed to cancer at a Miami hospital on May 11, 1981. At the age of 36, in the photo, Marley is barely recognizable. The dreadlocks that had become his global symbol are gone. His body is emaciated. His eyes, though, still hold a flicker of the fire. that made him one of the most important musicians and cultural figures of the 20th century. One of the last known photos shows the reggae icon in Germany, where he was receiving holistic treatment for cancer. Bob Marley had developed melanoma on his toe, but sought out alternative treatments rather than listening to the advice he received from most doctors. Though there were many conspiracy theories about the 36-year-old's death on May 11, 1981, his failure to seek proper treatment was the real cause. The melanoma had first appeared years earlier under his toenail. Doctors recommended amputation of the toe, but Marley refused, some say on religious grounds as a Rastafarian. Others say he was afraid it would affect his ability to perform. Instead, he opted for a partial removal. The cancer spread. By the time he sought treatment at the clinic of Dr. Josef Issels in Bavaria, it was in his lungs, his brain, and his liver. Marley left Germany in May 1981, hoping to return to Jamaica one final time. He never made it. His plane stopped in Miami, where he was taken to a hospital. He died on the morning of May 11. His last words, reportedly spoken to his son Ziggy, were, "Money can't buy life." George Harrison, Small World, Big Band. A photograph captures George Harrison during his last known public appearance, taken for the album booklet of Jools Holland's Small World, Big Band, released in 2001. The legendary Beatles member passed away in Los Angeles in November of that year, following a battle with cancer. In the image, Harrison looks thin but peaceful. There is a quietness about him that was always there. Even in the madness of Beatlemania, Harrison was the one who seemed most at ease with silence. He was the youngest Beatle, the one who brought Eastern spirituality into Western rock, the one who organized the concert for Bangladesh, and the one who in many ways had the most fulfilling post-Beatles career, spiritually if not commercially. By 2001, Harrison had been fighting cancer for several years. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer in 1997 and had undergone treatment, but the disease returned. In December 1999, he survived a horrifying home invasion at his estate, Friar Park, when a mentally ill man broke in and stabbed him repeatedly. His wife Olivia fought off the attacker with a lamp. Harrison was seriously injured but recovered, only for the cancer to continue its relentless advance. He died on November 29, 2001, at a friend's home in Los Angeles with his wife Olivia and son Dunny at his side. According to those present, he died peacefully, in a manner consistent with his spiritual beliefs. His final photograph, taken for a friend's album, shows a man who had made peace with his mortality long before it arrived at his door. Johnny Cash, The Carter Family Fold. Johnny Cash's final performance was on July 5, 2003, at the Carter Family Fold in Virginia. The photograph from that night shows Cash on stage, seated, guitar in hand, wearing his trademark black. He is old, he is frail. His voice, once a deep, booming force of nature, had thinned. But he is there, he is playing. He is doing the thing that had defined his life for half a century. Cash had been in declining health for years. He suffered from autonomic neuropathy caused by diabetes, which affected his breathing, his mobility, and eventually his eyesight. His beloved wife, June Carter Cash, had died just weeks earlier, on May 15, 2003. Those close to him said that after June's death, Johnny simply stopped wanting to live. He continued to record, working with producer Rick Rubin on what would become the final American Recordings albums, stripped-down, raw sessions that found Cash confronting death, faith, love, and legacy. With an honesty that bordered on brutal, his cover of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt became one of the most powerful music videos ever made. The aging man in black sitting in a crumbling mansion, surrounded by relics of his own legend, singing about the wreckage of a life lived hard. Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, at the age of 71. That last performance at the Carter Family Fold, the venue named for his wife's family, was his final gift to the music that had saved his life a dozen times over. The photo of him on stage that night, diminished in body but enormous in presence, is a portrait of a man who played until there was nothing left to play. The frame that remains, 13 photographs. 13 moments frozen in silver halide and pixel. Some were taken by professionals, others by fans with cameras they happened to have on hand. Some show legends in their prime, unaware that the clock was about to stop. Others show men and women visibly marked by the illness or despair that was about to take them. What they all share is this: the person in the photograph did not know, or chose not to acknowledge, that the camera was capturing their final public image. John Lennon did not know the man holding his album would return with a gun. Freddie Mercury did not know his smile in the garden would become a symbol of grace under unimaginable pressure. Elvis did not know that the drive through the Graceland gates would be his last. These images remind us that rock stars, for all their larger-than-life personas, are subject to the same brutal, indifferent forces as the rest of us. Illness, addiction, violence, despair, the camera cannot stop any of it. All it can do is hold the moment still, and let us look and remember, and carry the weight of what came next.